it's a pleasure to be here and to have this 6 months fellowship here in the École Française d'Athènes. And indeed, it's quite related to my presence here in Athens. It's quite related to the research I will talk about, because I'm here to develop a project about sonic issues, sound issues connected with memory and powers in the Balkans. And the perspective is also to collaborate scientists and artists. So it's quite the kind of stuff that I will discuss with you, but I will present you tonight. And perhaps to begin with some with some preliminary an introduction, a sonic introduction about my topic. I will switch to a short extrait of a sonic documentary that we are currently making with sound designer Raphaël Cordray about radiotočka. So let me just, and it will give you some kind of sonic appetizer. I don't know if it works, but okay.
C'était quelqu'un, historien, un ami anthropologue comme moi, on avait parlé. Au détour d'une conversation lors d'un repas chez Christine. C'était appelé qui m'a regardé, je m'en souviens. Comment ça? Je ne connais pas radiotočka, car on est voisin, et je lui avais répondu que non, je ne connaissais pas. Et là, ce qu'elle avait expliqué, c'était une radio que l'on trouvait dans le maison de mon village, et qui diffusait toutes sortes de programmes d'information. Les pronostics météo, les événements inhabituels, un concert de musique traditionnelle, c'était tout ça radiotočka, c'était de partout. Depuis, je n'arrêtais pas de penser. Je m'étais conçu comme imaginaire de ces radios, je les voyais comme une sorte de flux sonore continu. Et je me prenais à penser que je trouvais là un vrai sujet anthropologique, quelque chose de fort et d'original. Un sujet qui parlerait tout autant des dispositifs de contrôle biologique que de la vie quotidienne du communisme. Et c'est comme ça que j'ai décidé de partir à la recherche de radiotočka. À partir de 1947, le numérique massivement en matériel de diffusion de l'environ de millions de soviétiques. Apparaissent alors les récepteurs de sol canadien à une poche. Présent dans les c'est pas un diffusé à la fois les dimensions de la révolution et l'environnement. Et constitué la plupart majeure de l'alimentation, principalement pour la production et l'environnement. Par le quotidien, c'est par un déplacement d'intérêt constitué dans le secteur et le formage communiste, en principe idéologique et dans les démocraties.
So it's just to give you a short abstract of what it is about and the way we work with Raphaël. The idea is also to make a story out of the research and to put the auditory into the research in the making. But I have to explain first how I began to work with radiotočka and about radiotočka. So I will switch to. So yes, if you wish to hear more about this first episode of this audio documentary, you have here the link, and it's also available on the program of the seminar. Yes. So it was, as I explained in French in the episode you listened to, it was something by chance during a dinner. We were with colleagues in Plovdiv, and someone told me about this very specific stuff from the communist time, and almost like an anecdote, this radiotočky, which were typical from the communist time, and they were very localized, and they displayed very local news, something very close to the people, for example, in the villages. And he said, as an example, which was not taken by chance, for example, at this day, there will be a vaccination of the cattle, and another day, all the population should gather on the central place for the visit of the regional secretary of the party, and so on and so on. So what was interesting was this idea that this radiotočka was everywhere, was in the houses mainly, but also in the public buildings, in the central public spaces with loudspeakers displaying sounds. And I began to make some preliminary research about that, but I didn't find any archives about that, which was very interesting and surprising, because on the other side, there were a lot of commentaries, of memories, of narratives about this radio, and very diverse and sometimes contradictory, or very antagonistic. People saying that we had all these sounds all the time during the day. It was localized, the radio was localized in the courtyard, in my kitchen, very personal memories. Some people say that it was like the voice of the party, only one channel, because I will explain that this is a specific radio device, which is a cable radio with only one channel. You can't choose a station. You can only put the volume on or off. So, and people saying that we had access to culture with this radio. Other people saying that, okay, they maybe put micros inside it to spying people. So this kind of imaginations. And there was an expression, he or she speaks like a radiotočka, which was interesting also, because the idea was that the person speaking can't stop, and you can't change what he's saying. He's always saying the same stuff, the same things. So what was interesting was this idea that to stand between a problematic of material culture, it's a very specific object, very rudimentary, very simple in plastic. And on the other side, you add all these evocations of a soundscape, now lost, but still present in the memories. And I began to question people about their own radiotočka. They say that, okay, we may have one still in the village house, but it should be stored somewhere because it's useless. And there were also possibilities to find these radios in places like flea markets, stocks for spare parts, and even waste, because some people say that it's absolutely useless. So it's only something that some Tsiganin would be interested about. And this idea that there was some kind of disdain or irony about this kind of radio. And on the other side, when I made researches on internet, I discovered that these radiotočky were implanted in the world former Soviet Union. You had sites in Ukrainian, Russian, other languages and other countries, and the models were quite different, but based on the same system. Only one loudspeaker with the volume, and that's all, and mainly cabled on the beginning. So here you have some examples of what you can find on internet, and mainly sites where you can by old radiotočky and other sites where people do evoke some memories of the soundscape of the communism. For example, and I will go back to that, in the sound that I displayed, you can hear a specific song music, which is typical from the Bulgarian nationalist period and revival and so on, and which was used during the communist time as the jingle of a very, very famous program called Bulgaria de la Documenti, which was about historical and events and figures in Bulgaria. And most of the people had souvenirs of this specific program. And for me, it was like an emblem of this kind of sonic memories, which are on the one hand connected with specific sonic textures, specific music, but also this way of speaking. This man who is speaking, I don't remember the name of the speaker, but it's Georgis someone, and he has always this kind of very solemn vision of what he's saying to the people. So, and you have other photographs showing this kind of ornamentation of the radiotočka, which means that it's a part of the domestic space, the intimate space, and it's something that you forget at a moment because it's part of your house. So I began to make some lectures about radio in Bulgaria, and here I will just share with you some milestones about radio from what I read, there was at least 3 periods. One of what we can call a sonic modernity, and I quote the expression from Jonathan Stern here, and the national construction through the building of the voice of the nation. Michel Himes used this expression about the beginning of the radio in the United States. And shortly, the first radio in Sofia was a private one, Rodno Radio. Then it was state-owned in 1935. And after that, there were the development of some regional stations with mainly cultural programs, a lot of music and theater and poetry, news and educational programs. And it was also a period where radio was a synonym with technical progress and the possibility of diffusing messages abroad, and the creation of some kind of sonic models, ways of speaking, kind of sounds, ways of kind of languages which should be used for this new national radio. And of course, it was also an object of social distinction because it was mainly detained by bourgeois and urban classes, and it was perceived as a cultural practice, as something fancy, and also as a mark of international opening, because it was possible with radio receptors with several stations to join the foreign stations, radio stations. And there was also after that what we can call, but I wouldn't say that it was clearly so clearly like that, but a totalitarian phase. I mean by that an ideologization of the radio on the technical stakes surrounding the radio diffusion in Bulgaria, with uses of the radio for propaganda, for cultural education, and what is interesting in my example, what we can call a massification, the creation of a communist mass media between democratization, because there was some kind of vision of this radio as a possibility to enlighten the people and share cultural contents, and this idea of a cultural front. And of course, this period was also a period of geopolitical uses of radio during the Cold War, mainly through the a kind of opposition between this kind of radio and something like Radio Free Europe, and with a lot of testimonies and comments about the fact that it was part of the ordinary resistance of the people. People say that they used to catch Radio Free Europe by night and in the dark, and they tried to struggle with the blurring of the radio by the authorities, because the signal was blurred. And then we can speak about a progressive liberalization of the radio media, which is not which is part of the, on my mind, of the communist period too, but with a more relaxed period of communism, and which is marked by the training of the speakers, some kind of professionalization of the radio staffs, journalists. And although this is, I quote Viera Angelova on that point, the embodiment of international radio standards, and on the other side, the ideological conformity of the people who speak on the radio. So this kind of professionalization, of normalization, and also a period of technological transformations, because television appears during the 70s, and then after that, you have digitalization and the use of internet. And then after the communism, some kind of media pluralism with a lot of private radios, and the globalization of sounds and music and so on. So what is interesting here is that radio, there is a history of radio. There is no proper history or anthropology of the sonic stuffs, the sound as such in Bulgaria. And there is this kind of vision of the radio as, I would say, an emblematic sound of the country, but with a more or less critical history. But what is interesting here is that the great absence is radiotočka. No mention in the books. I read several books from scholars and from, I would say people who work in the radio, and they made their own history of the radio, and they all devote their attention to the official radio, to the, it can be the regional stations, but they do not mention radiotočka. Radiotočka, you will find evocations of radiotočka in some technical books about some and old communist stuffs, something like a typical object from the communists, but it is not perceived as a part of the soundscape or the official soundscape of the country in the communism. So what is interesting here is that I had to find other sources to know more about radiotočky through internet sites, through discussions, through an enlargement of the literature, not only the history of the radio or sound or anthropology or so on, but through technical brochures, technical books. And what I found is this idea of mass media under control, which was implemented in 1947 under the Soviet influence. And there is a correspondence in a lot of dates concerning the development of this kind of radio devices in the former Soviet Union. It's interesting because it looks like some kind of wave of massive industrialization of radio production and massive diffusion among the Soviet bloc. And you have some Bulgarian models in the 50s and mostly in the 70s, with the most famous model, which is Tonmeister. And I will show you again pictures about that because it's the most famous one. And then after that, to pursue with this short historical vision, there is a peak of radiophication. I mean by that radiofikacja, which means the equipment of radio cables, and it was in the 80s, at the same period where other media appeared, like the television. So this is interesting to see how these media, they don't succeed one another, but they interlap. And at the moment of the peak, the summum, the acme of radiotočka, it began perhaps to disappear a little bit at the benefit of television, for example. Then decline in the 90s and the 2000s, and a lot of people I consulted say that one date is for the definitive decline of this radio is 2006, because at that time there is a selling of a national company, Bulgarskie Telekomunikacji, and there is no possibility to manage the cable networks. The spare parts for the repairing the radio disappears little by little. So it's also a kind of relationships between the decline of a technical device and the economic change of the country. And what we see, what we can say about this radio, and here I quote a Bulgarian site, OMDR Wonderland Bulgaria, saying that radiotočka, it's a cabled radio. So it's a specific system of diffusion of the sound. Every village or big firm had this kind of radio. Most of the time they displayed national radio. There were norms for the duration, the time slots, and the contents of the programs. And these programs were received by devices installed and diffused in the houses, working places, and public spaces, where they were massive and installed above. This is important also symbolically on telegraphic or electric poles. And one would hear them not only in small localities, but in streets and public spaces from down. And the receptors were called points, točky, or loudspeakers, visokogovoritelji. And they said also that this was a state politic to develop this kind of radio system. So here you have an example of a loudspeaker in the town of Leningrad. So the first comment we can make, is it really a radio, or is it a loudspeaker for public and private uses, if we can speak of private uses? And in fact, these radiotočky, they were part of a whole system of sonification in Bulgaria. And for example, here you have an old picture from the 50s showing some kind of factory, and you see these loudspeakers which have specific functions. They can display music, they can display news, but they can also display instructions and I would say professional messages to the employees. So this is a monochannel and monofunction station receptor. So whatever the radio station and the music, it's only that will be heard on all points. You have no choice. So I said that it was from Soviet, made from the Soviet model, and it included a lot of sound systems in the public and official buildings. And you had even testimonies about the architectural use of this radiotočky, because sometimes it was included inside the wall of the apartment or the new houses, and they had special blocks inside. So there were a wall. There was a wall sonic reflection and ideology about the way this radio should be displayed and diffused. And I have this testimony of a young man saying that there were radiotočky inside the old communalki, and they are still in the walls because they just, when they refurbished the house, when they renewed the flat, for example, they just left the radio in the wall and they covered it. Yeah, so this is something which is also interesting, the way you may have in Bulgaria some kind of ghost radios in the walls. Yeah. And it was part of a whole broadcasting system because you had these radio points, but also what was called radio vessel, which means studio, and all the network of cables and which were in copper, so it was quite an expensive stuff. And this is one of the reasons for the stopping of this cabling of the country. And it was also called abonaten visogovoritel, loudspeaker subscription, which means that the people had to pay a very symbolic tax, but they paid yearly at the post office. And then you have also service radios in firms, factories, fabrics, cooperatives, and so on, which were devoted to the professional messages. So what is interesting here, and I will mainly, I will perhaps pass shortly on this slide, we can, it gives an idea of what was a communist soundscape, at least at the beginning of the communist period in Bulgaria. And here it's one of the technical books that I had the chance to read, and I had the chance because there were a lot of mathematics symbols and technical schemes and all these stuffs about acoustics and so on. But from time to time, you had some kind of more political issues in this book. For example, when the author, Martulkov, talks about norms of sonorization, including all the possible public buildings, train stations, boats, stadiums, concert halls, and so on and so on. And when he speaks about the cable technology, he said that it's sonic quality and energy saving. So it's important for our industry in rapid development. He also add that the amps should function always because music takes part to productivity. And other stuffs about the relationship, for example, between health and sound. The good sonorization of health establishments can accelerate the curing process so that the workers can go back to contribute again to the production. Education and sonorization, which improve the level of success and discipline, yes. And also some stuff about the dialectic between noise and sound. So the idea is to also to combat, to fight the noise of industrial production by producing radio technical devices which promote an interesting term, which appears several times in these books: intelligibility, разбираем моста. It means that technical, these sound techniques are in the service of intelligibility, of the clear communication. So we can find here relationships between political power and sonic power. And also this idea of politics and infra-politics, because I think that sounds is also about, not only about explicit messages, about explicit soundscapes, but you have all these details, all these small sonic stuffs which are part of the soundscape, and you have a specific sonic modernity. So here are some examples of drawn from these books. Here it's a train station with these loudspeakers, and you have also a lot of stuff about this, I would say, this ideal figure of the sonic modernity, the studio. Yes, and you can see that it's a piano, a woman working as a technical, on the technical. So you have all these little stuffs which are inspiring because it's all connected to a specific vision of what should be the soundscape of the communism. Yeah. So what appears also is that radiotočka passes under the radar because it's a very local radio. It's a very localized technical stuff. And it's also connecting to the vision of modernization of the territory and its connection through this radio media and radification. And some authors say that radiotočky equip several buildings and private houses in poorly inhabited regions, which is important, where people can't buy usual radio receptors. So this idea that it's a kind of modernization and a massification of the radio throughout the territory. And you have this air and subterranean cabling of localities and the installation of radio studios in post offices or in city halls. And you have also this idea that you can have this collective radio service. People can gather in the House of Culture Digitalichte, and they can also listen to the news in the public, in the central place of the village when they decide to display the news. And of course, you have all these individual uses of the radio. You pay this tax and you have access to this radio monochannel. So some people say that it was like the Glashatei, the public speaker and hauler. And so it mainly displayed the national programs, and there were local trenches from 1 or 2 hours per day, which were managed by benevolent or specific employees. And what I want to stress here is that the emblematic space of radiotočka was the small town or the village. And when you hear about examples, when people say radiotočka was about that and that, they mainly take examples from the village situation. For example, this citizen, and this is an author which wrote something about radiotočka, and he said, this is the radio vessel of this village. Our citizen has lost his cow, may the one who sees it call him. So this kind of vision of a very remote radio system, and with some specific functions. For example, give exact time, transmit messages from the municipality, inform inhabitants of different events, which can be important or minor, entertainment and local social interactions. For example, you have this kind of pozdravitelen concert, which is this kind of dedication to someone, and you dedicate a song, and for example, at the occasion of a marriage, and so very proxy relationship through the radio, but also mainly economic messages about the production and all the political activities. And here I will give you an example of a man. He was a speaker in the radiotočka of the village of Staroželezare. It's in the area of Plovdiv. And when I met him, he was age 80 years old. And he said he was postman and radio vodach, radio speakers in the 80s. And what was interesting also is he was from the part of the Rom community in this village. And what was interesting during this interview and other interviews was this idea that it was a specific sonic milieu which was connected to social, cultural, and political features. For example, he said that he had to pass a contest for animating the radiotočka. He said that the main job was to meet other people, to prepare and write the broadcast, and himself manage the technical stuffs. It was a very small room with a micro, an amp. You switch on and you begin. Dobar večer, dragi slušatelji. And he said that we mainly deal with the news interesting the village, the firemen, the health issues, agricultural production, concerts, breeders, and he mentioned several times the zootechnicians, which was interesting because, of course, it's a kind of, also a transmission of, I would say, technical norms for the people from the cooperative. For Trifonzarazan, which is a celebration, we will make a radio greeting concert, post-Ravitelen concert. We will announce marriages and funerals, and so on and so on. So he said explicitly that he didn't deal with the big events, what he called the big events, and he said that it was Chujdite, something strange, something not from here, and something that you should listen to Radio Sofia if you wanted to hear about, because I spoke, for example, about the 89 and the transition, the post-communist transition, just to know what he would say about that. And he said, okay, it was not in our scope, so it was business as usual, the same news. And of course, what was interesting here is this kind of working division, radio work division between professionalists and amateurs, in a sense. So, for example, he said that here we displayed Narodna music, popular music. It was not like in Plovdiv, for example, because there it was culture. So culture, the importance of culture. The chiefs, they had no radiotočka. And in Hisar, it's a nearby commune from the village, he said that the big radiotočka, Radio Vezer, radio studio, was managed by a professional journalist with education, which was important for him. And it was more politico, it was more political, meaning that they had to speak in a certain way also. They had to speak, to behave, and to produce sounds in a certain way, not only in the messages, but in the way of talking. And there were several interesting comments about the fact that in radiotočka, you could also hear people working with the same accent, in a sense, which is interesting in terms of recognition of a sonic community. And he said that about the, I asked him about the control. He said that, yes, he had to give to the culture in Hisar, the culture meaning the chiefs, the program, and all the papers that he would write and display on the radio. And another comment which was interesting was that he said that he was very kind comparatively with his predecessor, Bai Boncho, which was more harsh and critical. And he told some, he used to criticize a lot, for example, the brigadiers and the cooperative. And what was implicitly the idea was that this man, Bai Boncho, had another background. He was, and he said after that, he said he was from the party, he went to USSR, he had a Russian wife, and so on and so on. So you can feel by little, by these little and subtle nuances, how people posit themselves in terms of, in political and cultural terms. So I would say that maybe Radiotočka was the radio of the people, the people's radio, but I also, for some commentators, a radio of the poor, because it was technically simple and perhaps culturally simple, mainly for the professional journalists, which were very critical about Radiotočka. So it was associated to the village life, to remote territories. It was solid and powerful, but very poor technically and in terms of sonic quality. So we should also pay attention to this kind of sonic quality, sonic texture, which is different depending on the kind of radio. And people made a distinction between Radiotočka and Radio Prijemnici, this kind of multi-station radio with which you could also reach and capture the foreign stations. So was it some kind of under radio, an amateur radio managed by non-trained locals versus professional radio journalists? People said, people working in the official radios said that it was very banal and triviality of in terms of information and messages, and they emphasize the cultural role of the national radio in front of this kind of local radio. So this is why you can find no archives also recordings about radiotočka because it has no cultural value in a sense, and it was performed live. Nothing was recorded, which is interesting in terms of what we think is worthy to record, to keep or not, and what is worthy to become an archive. And when you go to the BNR, the National Bulgarian Radio in Sofia, you have this, for example, the main archive fund. There is this kind of Zlatnia fund, which is the summum of the radio culture, but you can't find these very local programs. So, and it's also perceived as, I would say, ideological radios, very associated to communist radios, opposed to these bourgeois and urban radios, multi-stancy, with a lot of stations. And people, they didn't made actually this distinction so clearly. I emphasize that. But at several times, people said, I didn't add radiotočka, I had a German receptor because I was able to change the station and to find foreign stations. So it's something like a first idea that I have to develop. And it was considered as a closed radio versus an open, maybe dangerous radio. People say that they listen to Radio Svobodna Europa, Radio Free Europe, and other foreign radios. For example, Radio Skopje, which came a lot in the interviews. And what is interesting here is that you have, according to the kind of radio that you use, you have different practices of listening, of sound techniques and sound control. Yes. So radiotočka, it's a blank point in the study of radio because it's the small history of radio in front of the big history of radio. And for me, it's another argument to say that it's related to what I can call an infra-politics of and through sound. So here is an interview from this man. He's the director of Radio Stara Zagora, so he's a professionalist, and he said that they had a very limited function. They were not of good quality. It was not professional technically, and they didn't record what they said, and nothing was recorded, all was live. And it was not seen as very serious, this radiotočki. Not a real radio or news broadcast, a closed system. So after that, my main point will be about the place that this radio takes in the memories of the people that I could meet. And I decided to ask. We decided with Raphael Cordrez, a sound designer, whom I was working, to create some kind of specific sonic methodologies. For example, we made a mix of different jingles from emissions from the communist time. And we had this kind of 10 minutes 10 minutes sequence, and I used to go in different public spaces or during some kind of gatherings to install myself and to display that and propose to the people to react. You know, this kind of audio elicitation, which was very interesting because some people, they would absolutely refuse that. And some of the people, they were very able and kind and willing to share what they had, their memories, and not only good memories, but also more harsh memories. So what was interesting here is this kind of collection of plural narratives and plural and divergent sonic memories. And one first comment I would make is that people told about some kind of intricate soundscapes. They, of course, there is some kind of memory remaking and imagination. But when they began to speak, some of them said that it was all the time, and it began at dawn till 10 o'clock p.m. And we could listen in the village place to the news from the national radio, the political broadcast, and there was a lot of traditional music. And we woke up this music, and there was this sounding all day long, and with all the people's problems, cooperative, and so on and so on. And over comments about the fact that these radios were widespread in every public buildings, and they function all day long. So you have this idea, this perception of a continuous sonic flow, and people saying that they were fed of that sometimes, and especially the younger people saying that we were fed of this narodna muzika, this popular music all the time on the wall of the drugstore in the village. And so it's also interesting to analyze this kind of comments in terms of sonic taste or distaste, and depending on the generations, depending on the background, depending on your own acceptation of what is displayed on this radio. So there is also something about the domestication and the intimacy of this radio. I would say that the localization, for example, is important, because a lot of people most of the people say that it was in the common spaces, for example, the kitchen or the living room. But they also used to have several radios. They can have a radiotočka and then other radios in private spaces, for example, the room, offices. And what was especially interesting for me was this idea that the radio was positioned in some kind of thresholds, transitory spaces. For example, the hall, the corridor, the garden, and there were a lot of examples of the radiotočka put in the window between inside and outside. So you can have the radio inside the kitchen during the winter, and then you just have to remove it to have the radiotočka on the garden during the summer. So you have also different system of fixations on the shelf, mobile, and all this ornamentation of the radio, which is also interesting, because it's what is we are in this kind of Daniel Miller's vision of material culture and making home, making house, and the radiotočka take part of the house building. And also there were convergent comments about the fact that the radio was a kind of intimate and collective time order. So a lot of people say that the radio marked the several steps of the day, the rhythm of the day. One interviewee said that it was in our kitchen on the wall near the door, and it was the sound of my kitchen during the day and even the night. Radiotočka rhythm my everyday life. On the morning, stories for the children at 6:50. I knew it was time to get ready for school. Then the news and the broadcast, Bulgaria, della I documenti, the famous one, yes. If I listened to this program, I knew I would be late at school. So what I would like to stress here is the fact that people won't talk spontaneously about radiotočka, because I think that for them it's part of the very, very ordinary life. But when you begin to put the subject, the topic on the table, they have a lot of anecdotes. So there is this kind of a balance between the fact that it's something like semi-conscious or unconscious, because people say it's not important. People think that perhaps it's not important as such. It's something, it's a detail, but it's a very revelatory detail. And some woman from the Museum of the Radio said that, yes, in fact, because I made a visit at the Museum of the Radio in Sofia, and of course I had the great history of the radio. And then I insisted, tell me about radiotočka. She said, okay, so what about radiotočka? It's nothing, it's not radio. And after several exchanges, she said, yes, in fact, it's something very ordinary, but it's also very Bulgarian, and it's disappearing. So what you have, and this is why I choose this kind of folkloric photographs. So it's you can find it on internet. This connection, this association of this radiotočka with old people, elder people, and for example the baba, the grandma. And one interviewee said, my baba called it gossip. So this idea of a familiar, a nostalgic memory of the radio, which was also a tool of cultural discovery, knowledge, and learning. And people saying that if we didn't add this radio, we would not have been so much educated. We were raised by radiotočka. Of course, you have all this nostalgic vision and this embellishment of the past, but I think that it's quite revelatory of the evocation of this radio as something that people had in their environment from the childhood. And they used to, she said, the same person said that we used to put chairs in the corridor, in the house. The radio was above the door because for the children not to touch it. And we listened to the program. So this kind of very familiar situation. And there is also a lot of evocations of the role of radiotočka to maintain social contact for elder people. And people say that it's a pity that this radiotočki disappear because they had some kind of social function, maintaining the contact with the elder people, the lonely people, and especially in a context of migration, exodus, desertification of the village, withdrawal of the state also. So we could also see radiotočka as something emblematic of a lost social and sonic community. It's also a sonic material culture, which is on the edge of disappearing, but also with some kind of heritage processes and resurgences. For example, I show you a different photograph of where to find radiotočki in this kind of shop for Bokludzi, waste, old stuffs, materials which are not, which I wonder who would buy something here, for example, you know. And on the other side, this kind of antique shops for vintage stuffs. And here you have a photograph of a radiotočka, an old one which was installed in a bath, public bath in Leningrad. And the story is very interesting because, and it's not the only story of this revitalization of radio and numerization. People use the radiotočka. They make the connection with, for example, a smartphone or a tablet, and they use it as some kind of evocation of the good old time. And some kind of, the man who did that said, we are in a public bath, so it's also good to have music because we had music before in the socialist time. And now we can make some kind of zvukoterapia, sound therapy, you know. So this readaptation and this idea that we should also take care of the soundscapes. And I will tell you more about this specific radio. You have this kind of artistic evocation of radiotočki. It's a photograph. We made a series of photos about kitchen from the Balkans. And she mentioned explicitly this radiotočky as a full part of the and this aestheticization of the socialist stuffs objects. And on the other side, you have more, I would say, negative memories, saying that considering radiotočka as an object related to power control and the former world, propaganda manipulation, some sonic traumas, and I will give you an example because it's interesting. Our sound is also perceived as a source of wellness, but it can also be a source of illness. And I met several people saying that they can't stand no more this kind of sonic, of music, of jingles that they used to hear as a child during the communist period. So I had an interview with one man, which was a chemist, and he made a clear distinction between the radiotočka. His wife had communist parents, and they had a radiotočka in the apartment. He said that maybe they were obliged to have one, but me and my family, we were on the other side, and we have no radiotočka. We had no radiotočka, but a grounding radio receptor with 6 short waves. And I listened to Radio Svobodna Evropa, even if it was forbidden. And other evocations, less political, but about this generation issue, about what kind of the generational dimension of the soundscapes. This young women living in France saying that, yes, of course, I hear to radiotočka in the village, but for me, it was this radio on the wall of the grocery shop, and always the same music from the old people, from the old folks, and I was fed up with that. So here we touch also the issue of the sonic aesthetics and taste and distaste through sound. And during my experimentations in one street in Plovdiv, where I used to display this kind of sound mixes with jingles, I made interviews with people living here or working in the streets and so on. And some of them didn't want to answer to my questions and or to take part to the game. Others were found it very funny. And there was this woman, she was selling something in the streets, and she was shy, obviously, but she paid a lot of attention to what I was saying. And after a while, we engaged the discussion, and she told me this story. She said, no, I wouldn't like to discuss about that, because what I remember about radiotočka was in the 80s. I lived in an orphanage, and we had this radiotočka above the door on the wall, and every morning at 6 in the morning, they put this communist song, and I will never forget that. And we wanted, it made us mad, and we wanted to shoot this radiotočka. This is what I connect to radiotočka, this past, and I don't want to go back to it. And I asked her what kind of song was it, and she said Od koga se mila Mainolio. And after that, we pursued the discussion, and we listened to we arrived to this opening sequence of this program, Bulgaria Delai Documenti, with this song. And she said, this is the song I told you. And it was the song which woke me up at 6 a.m., but loud, and in a more military version. So you had this impact of a specific sonic, a specific song on this memory. And of course, you have also some kind of imaginaries and phantasmatic representations. For example, the idea that radiotočka was in fact a mic, a micro, We called it microfonce, the small micro. There were also rumors about the fact that the central authority, whoever, was able to control at distance radiotočka, switching it on or off. And one man said to me that this radiotočki in the villages, they gave Russian station. It was Radio Moskva, the Soviet news. So this kind of confusion also, but very indicative of what is at stake. And all these ideas about the idea that it was a closed system like Bulgaria at the time, and it was some kind of permanent pressure from a totalitarian system, even in the more intimate spaces. And another interesting comment is about the fact that these radiotočki were positioned above on the top. And it was a kind of symbolic vision of the power, the messages from the power, the news coming from the top. So I would mention also a few alternative narratives which are quite interesting and important because after that I discovered that you had several very local uses of this radio. And what I want to stress here is the fact is that for me, the fact that it was some kind of under radio, that it was considered as a non-radio, very local amateur, it gave room for the people to make very local comments and very local programs and broadcasts, always in the line of the, I would say, of the local authorities, but with a possibility to how to say, to cheat with the official line. And for example, in Radio Kırklareli, so it's a city in the Rhodops, the Eastern Rhodops, with a mixed population. The former director of the radio said that there was a Turkish redaction in 1963 till 1970. And then after that, they canceled all the programs in Turkish. And another info that I gathered on the field, but I have to see that, to confirm that. In Pazarcik, for example, the local mayor organized a heavy metal festival, and they used radiotočka to display this kind of music. And so what I would say is it a kind of subversion and resistance, or is it moreover, I would say, an element of local autonomy with some kind of margin of tolerance and accommodation with the power? Is it a conscious opposition, or moreover the expression of kind of community cultural intimacy, which is also addressed in front of the, I would say, the central authorities, Sofia, Plovdiv, and so on? So this addresses the issue of what kind of sonic communities are formed around this radiotočki, and how they also connect with imagined communities, which are not only the national narrative of the global imagined communities, but they can also be very localized and very particular. And I will mention a last point before to end this presentation with some comments about research and creation. There is an issue about sensoriality, aesthetics, and politics. And just this example. So I mentioned this radiotočka in the bath of Velingrad. And I asked the man who did that, which is the boyfriend of the employee of the bath, and it was a very local initiative. He said, "Okay, in the past we had music in the the room where you change le vestiaire." Bon, voilà. And why not install these radios in the bath, and he did that because he has a electrotechnical background, and he said that he installed all the digital system from this place here, which is the whole of the bath, and this connection with the radiotočka inside. And I just asked, okay, so it's good. It's zvukoterapia, sound therapy, right? Yes, but what kind of programs do you display? And he said, oh, yes, we can switch radios, but it's mainly Macedonian music. Okay. So, and what is interesting here is that, okay, it's not, we are not far from Bulgaria, Macedonia, but it's not quite the area. And he said, I said, okay, why? Because people like it. And when you have an overview of this part of the town, you understand that this is a part of the town where a lot of families were refugees from the Macedonian background and who live in this neighborhood, Kamenica. And so you have all this connection between cultural identity, social background, generational status, and the sensoriality and the aesthetics, the sonic aesthetics, because it was clearly, in my mind, a kind of sonic mark of this place as a territory of identity. And it was also, it was not explicit, but when you compare this narrative about radiotočka with the whole narrative about the bath and the public space, it was also a kind of distinctive sound space, sound mark, soundscape to address to specific users of the bath by distinction with the other users that that the people fear to have here, the rooms. Yes, and what I would say here is that, of course, all that has to be refined, to be confirmed. So, but through this radiotočka example, in my mind, the question is also about sonic identities and alterities, which are our sounds, the sound of the others, how they negotiate. And in this specific example of the bath, it's very typical because there is an issue about the sound, the sonic occupation of the bath. It should not be messy. You should not bring children in it screaming, and you should have an appropriate sonic behavior and so on and so on. So all that to say, yes, and I close in 2 minutes, okay? All that to say that this approach for research creation is also very important in this project, because what I realized is that by cooperating with a sound designer which doesn't know nothing about Bulgaria, but understand things and gain knowledge through his ears, you can have other insights about your old field work, because he will drive your attention to some details. You think they are not important. You think that they are some kind of the dust of the field work, but they have their own sonic imprint, their own sonic identity, and they can mix with the ethnographic vision of the field. So this kind of sonic texture of the field. And I would say that for me, research creation is a form of knowledge where we had to learn to listen together, listen to each other and together. And it's about not only working on sound, but with sound, with a lot of experimentations. And the good side of the research creation and the artistic vision is that you can push the barriers of the so-called appropriate behavior on the field. You make experiments with people and you make a fun of that also. So it's also some kind of displacement of the ethnographic position of authority. And you have also this stochastic and serendipity vision of the field, because, for example, Bulgaria Delay Documenti, the famous music, which I have in mind since 1 year, something like that, because it's always turning here, this music. This was a choice of Raphael. He selected on the archives of Radio Nationale Bulgare several jingles, and he put this music in. And when so it was somewhat by chance, but when I saw the effect of this music on the people, I said, okay, so it's a good chance, yes. And the idea that you can have at once a research process and a narrative process. The idea that you should include in this kind of documentary the position of the researcher himself as a character of the story he is telling with the people. And of course, it needs negotiations, because sometimes we don't agree about. I just mentioned that, but Raphael said, we have to find the proper character. We have to find the proper son. And I said, but what is interesting ethnographically is that, it's not that. And so we had to negotiate the distinction between ethnography and storytelling, yes. And after that, you have all this very interesting dimension of the production of something which is, in my mind, another way of producing knowledge through sound creation. So thank you very much. And sorry if I have been a little bit long, but we started a little bit late. Okay.